Hi, I'm Delicia. Good morning. And I'm the Managing Director here at Edelman in Singapore. I also run corporate reputation initiatives for some of our largest global clients based in Singapore and the region. So as Pei mentioned, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Edelman Trust Barometer. As you may have seen the headlines in the newspaper today, essentially the Edelman Trust Barometer is our trust index where we look at trust across the various institutions, media, NGOs, also looking then at trust in government and trust in business, most importantly as well. As communicators, why is this important? This sets the context for us. As the ladies mentioned earlier in their presentations, it's about reaching the people, it's about connecting with your customers. And for us, we looked at a number of mega trends that we've tracked over the last 5 years. So what we've seen is that there is a rise in expectations of business to really do what is right. Again, in terms of trust in government, no surprises there, I think, for many of us in Singapore and across the world, really looking then at that dispersion of authority. We've moved away from the classic authority figures and closer to a person like myself. We all know that's probably because of the democratization of the media as well and greater access with the internet. Fake news, big news across all markets and really pertinent in Southeast Asia and Asia as well. I know in Vietnam, that's a very key topic for discussion, especially with corporates looking to break through and reach out to different stakeholders as well. And finally, as we see Greta Thunberg, take the world by storm, or by boat, as the case may be, we're seeing power to the people, right? And really the traditional pyramid of influence where you had the opinion elites and then the mass public further down the scale, that's really been flipped as people are starting to take their power into their own hands. Really then speaking to the rise of the person like myself as a trusted spokesperson as well. So really moving on into why trust is important, because really it underpins a lot of the way that the different stakeholder groups behave. Consumers won't buy a product from a company that they don't trust. Employees, again, as we know, it's a gig economy that we work in, and there is a battle for talent, which we will talk about later, but employees will not work for a corporation that does not have value or values, as Belinda talked about earlier in terms of what you stand for as an organization. Of course, as we know in this changing regulatory environment across the different markets, especially if you run a global business, this becomes doubly important, building that trust to make sure that you continue to have a license to operate. And with regards to investors, we all saw, the big bold moves that BlackRock has made in the last week, really in terms of then not only strengthening your license to operate, but also making sure that you are more likely to be in tune with where your investors' heads are at again. And more on the communication side of things, trust enables us to be more resilient against risk. Again, trusted companies, as we have seen, because more people buy your product, because more people invest in you, you're more likely to outperform in the sector. And of course, when we go back to the nuts and bolts and bread and butter of communications, earning attention. Trusted companies, the media will also trust you a lot more, and therefore you will get twice more positive coverage than distrusted organizations. So kind of common sense, but we drill down into the numbers, some interesting insights and food for thought as communicators today. If we go on to the next slide, we will then see that the world that we live in is no longer flat. And really there are two different trust realities. The informed public, so these are the wealthier, more educated and frequent consumers of news, remain more trusting of every institution than the mass population. So in a majority of markets, less than half of the mass population trust their institutions to do what is right. And as you can see from this slide, there is now a record 8 markets showing all-time high gaps between the two audiences, which as communicators, as regional and global communicators, this is an alarming trust inequality as well. So who are you reaching with your message and how are you doing so? So again, what is this distrust driven by? And that's really driven by a growing sense of inequity and unfairness in the system, the perceptions that there is different treatment between the have and have-nots. Really food for thought as we share our messages, positive messages about our organizations or about our product offerings as well. Just zooming through the next couple of slides, interestingly enough, globally, no institution is seen as both competent or ethical. again, another big problem that is not solely something that we can solve from a communications perspective, but again, we need to do what is right, making sure that we deliver on promises and also take into context how we're contributing back to the community as well, building on that message of purpose as we talked about earlier. Going on to the next slide, really in terms of what each institution can do, I will leave you to go to edelman.com to read the slides in detail because we don't have time. And if I can get to really what the crux of all of this means is that our world is actually a very fragmented world. The audiences that we speak to are no longer straightforward. And in terms of trusted sources and channels, we really need to look at where people are getting their information, how they want to receive that information, and who do they trust to give them the accurate information as well. Complex world we live in.